Hello and welcome to today's interview where I will be interviewing few individuals on their part and take of history. Our first section will be over American imperialism. So, what could you tell me about the growth of imperialism?
The economy was the biggest thing in the industry in Europe, which led to a need for natural resources like rubber and petroleum.
Do you think there are other factors that affected the growth of imperialism?
Yes, the military made a huge advancement in technology, which led to the Navy needing bases for fuel and supplies. Along with the humanitarian factors, the duties spread ideas of Western cities at the time, such as medicine and Christianity.
Okay, is that all?
No, also, Europe paved the way with solid transportation along with communication. The state secretary sent troops to Mexico to stop France controlling. They also brought Alaska from Russia.
Wow, that's a lot of information already, thank you. Our next section we will be covering are the questions and promotions of economic growth. So what could you tell me about the economic growth?
Well, we can start where America couldn't consume the goods they're producing. Typical. So they set out to find a foreign market. They came across the Banana Republic, which helped deliver 50 million bunches of bananas to Costa Rica, Guatemala, and the Honduras. As you can see, they were the dominant government in those countries.
Wow, that's really great information. Are you sure this is all 100% real?
Yes, of course, thanks to Mr. Reints.
What can you tell me about the Naval Advisory Board, along with the American security?
Well, the Naval Advisory Board was established in 1881. They expanded the budget and strength of the Navy, which led them to build a new ship. Then this led to the Naval Act of 1890. This authorized continued construction of ships. And by 1900, the U.S. had one of the most powerful navies in the world and were ready to battle anyone.
What can you tell me about the American spirit?
Social Darwinism was a big thing at the time, and this made certain civilizations bigger to others, and along with this, made them want to spread Christianity and civilization.
For our next section, we will be covering the U.S. and Latin America. So, sir, what can you tell me about the U.S. and Latin America, about the three main groups here? We can start first with Chile. What can you tell me about the Chile mob?
Well, the Chile mob killed 2 American officers, and the government was forced to pay $75,000 to families in the U.S.
Interesting. What about the Brazilian people at the time?
The people of Brazil rebelled against the government and were sent into ships to protect shipping interests of the U.S.
Is there any more information? Wasn't Great Britain involved or something?
Yes, of course, Great Britain was involved. At the time, they battled over land in Venezuela, and the U.S. demands that Great Britain identified the Monroe Doctrine and came to a settlement. Along with that, Great Britain decided to go away from the war so they could keep America on the good side of Germany.
That is really useful information. Where did you get all this from?
The one and only Mr. Reints.
Wow. What a great teacher you must have. What can you tell me about the Cuban Rebellion?
Well, Cubans rebelled against Spanish because of poor economy. Then Spain had prisoners in something like a concentration camp, which were very poor conditions.
Did the Cubans respond in any way?
Cubans in America destroyed the sugar plantations to make the Americans find an urge for intervention.
Okay. So, could you tell me the steps leading up to the Spanish-American War?
Yes, it all started in Havana as the riots made President McKinley move battleships into the harbor. And then the Spanish ambassador called McKinley a weak and bitter for a crowd.
Interesting. So what do you think was the next step that made it closer to getting to war?
The explosions in Maine, which was thought to be ammunition, that killed 250 Americans, which was a big public outrage. Then President Roosevelt, Assistant Secretary of the Navy at the time, thought some islands were good for a safe base for an Asian trade. Then the Navy in the Pacific was preparing for war against Spain.
This is a lot of things Was there any peace or what?
Yes, this was where peace was settled. It went like this: the compensation from Maine, end of concentration, the truce in China, and the Cuban independence.
Ah, I see. What do you know about the war named A Splendid Little War?
On May 1st, 1898, the first surprise attack on Philippines. The entire war lasted about 9 weeks. 2,500 Americans died, 400 in battle, mostly from food poisoning, yellow fever, and poor medical care and such.
Understandable. Is that all? Is there anything else like after the war that led up that just had peace or anything?
Why, yes, after the war, we signed the Treaty of Paris, signed by Spain and America. Along with that, Spain recognized Cuba's independence and gave up Philippines. Cuba and Puerto Rico became independent U.S. territory.
So why was it necessary that U.S. be in power of it violated principal right to liberty of people?
The war with Philippines, they thought they would gain independence following the Spanish-American War, but that didn't work out too well.
Okay, so what was the fate of Cuba and Puerto Rico then?
Cuba became independent. The installation of military government for 3 years began by organized school systems, restored economic stability, and then the command found a cure for the yellow fever. Then the Cubans began a draft of constitution and didn't allow the U.S. to be involved.
This is really good information, and we will be right back after this commercial.
Why, hello. Have you ever wanted to get rid of the stain? Use Great Value Stain Remover. Just spray it on, throw it in the washer, and there you go.
Hello and welcome back, and we are here with the historian to tell us more about the history of America and the fight and stuff. So we are going to pick up where we left off, which is the opening doors to China. So what can you tell us about that?
Well, this was the last thing that happened in the Spanish and American War. The spheres of influence, which were the areas of economic and political control by countries such as Russia, Germany, Britain, France, Japan, and the U.S.
Amazing. So what can you tell me about the open door policy? I know that was a thing.
The open door policy was offered by the U.S. when they wanted equal access to China for trade, and this was intended for protecting this policy.
Okay. So what about the Panama Canal? I know that was some part in that history. Can you tell me about it?
The Panama Canal linked Atlantic and Pacific Oceans and made shipping so much faster and efficient, and this also allowed the Navy to travel faster. Then the French company began to construct the canal for around the price of $40 million.
$40 million. Insane.
Yes. And the next came the Sooner Act, which this act authorized purchases of rights for the canal for about $40 million from France.
Wow, another $40 million for the rights of the canal? There must have been money flowing through that river.
Of course there was. But then Colombia was waiting to sell at the highest price they could get. And this made Roosevelt mad, and he told the French he didn't oppose the revolt against the Colombians. So then the U.S. stepped in as Panama's protector. Along with that, they received $10 million.
For what?
I don't know, don't ask me. Ask Reints, he taught me everything.
Okay, we'll do. Is there anything you can tell me with the foreign policy in the early 1900s?
Of course, again, but not very much. All I know is that Teddy Roosevelt once said, "Speak softly and carry a big stick."
What could that possibly mean?
It means that his big stick was the Navy, and he would use it anytime he needed it, basically.
So, can you tell me more about this Roosevelt stuff?
Yes, the Monroe Doctrine in December 1823 warned European nations that the United States would no longer tolerate no more colonization or puppet monarchs.
So that's pretty straightforward, isn't it? Okay, so we can jump back to this China and Roosevelt thing. How did that work?
Teddy Roosevelt wanted the friendship to last with China for as long as he could, so he did. But this was while Russia and China were at war. And then the mediated peace agreement in 1905 happened. I don't know quite how or it took place or what exactly it was, but yeah, that's what happened with that. Their friendship lasted.
Amazing. Tell me about the Taft. Tell me about Taft and his thing he was going on at that time.
Ah, yes, William Howard Taft. He was elected president in 1908. His main goal was to maintain cultures by increasing American investment in other countries, but this wasn't very successful. Then he tried to maintain the open door with Asia and preserve strength in Latin America, and this was great. But that's basically all I can tell you on that.
Wow. We will be right back after this commercial. You ever wanted to cement your roof? Well, then you need to use Blackjack's Original Series plastic roof cement to make sure you get the best pristine water protection, any protection you can get on your house. Hello and welcome back. So, shall we pick up where we left off? So this is our last section of questions we have today, and we're going to start with, I want you to tell me about the anti-imperialist as much as you can.
Well, the anti-imperialists had many problems, such as morale and a lot of political stuff, like the expansion of it contradicted liberty for all, and it threatened the democratic foundations, like others would turn against its own. That's how bad it was.
So were there any racial arguments?
Of course, there were everywhere. American officials and the public believed that people of Anglo-Saxon race were better than other races, but most of the Southerners didn't like that because they thought it would make people move out of the United States.
It's very weird. Was there any other problems like money or anything at the time?
Yes, the economic arguments were terrible. Their words said like, it costs too much to maintain the army and taxes were very high. Let alone immigration would take jobs from Americans and it made working harder and led to more starvation and homeless people.
That seems like a really sucky life to live. But anyways, this is the last question I have for you today. What was the Great White Fleet? And what was the outcome of it?
The Great White Fleet was a group of naval ships that were sent out to go around the world to show off the Navy of the United States, basically. And the outcome was that it made us look like a big Navy and no one fought with us at the time over the sea.
Very interesting. Well, thank you for coming in today and answering my questions I have for you. That's all, folks. Have a great rest of your day.